The flickering neon sign of the Desert Star gas station buzzed like a dying insect, casting a sickly glow over the rain-slicked asphalt. Beneath it, Alex Carter lay bleeding, the cold seeping through his worn jacket. Each shallow breath of battle against the darkness closing in. Pressed tightly against him was Kane, a wounded German shepherd, his own blood mingling with the rain. He had refused to abandon the only human who had ever seen the soul behind his scars. Rain hammered the corroded roof, each drop a sharp tap against the silence. Inside his beat-up SUV, Alex gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white. His eyes, sharp and shadowed, scanned the empty lot. They were eyes that had seen too much in dusty, faraway lands. At his side, Kane shifted his weight, alert yet steady. The faded patches on his service harness were a silent testament to years of loyalty, not to a police force, but to the broken veteran beside him. To most, Kane was just a problem dog, too damaged and unpredictable. But for Alex, the dog was the only anchor in the storm of his own mind. He remembered the first day at the rescue, seeing Kane locked in a cage. The dog hadn't barked or begged. He just watched, with a quiet dignity that said he was used to being passed over. Alex had seen something in that look, a reflection of his own isolation. The scanner on his dashboard crackled to life. Any units in the area? We have a call about a possible break-in at the Desert Star on Route 8. Owner reports a suspicious vehicle parked near the back bays. Alex let out a slow breath. Copy that. Probably just kids or someone looking for shelter from rain. His voice carried the weight of exhaustion. He pulled the SUV around to the far corner of the lot. A beat-up service truck sat awkwardly, its rear doors hanging open. Fresh, wet footprints led away from the bumper and vanished into the deep shadows. Alex pushed his door open. Kane circled him immediately, his nose skimming the wet ground, his hackles rising as he caught a faint chemical scent. Alex reached for his heavy-duty flashlight. "It's nothing, boy," he said, the impatience in his voice betraying his own unease. "Let's just make this quick." They approached the vehicle together. But this time, Kane paused, his entire body going rigid. A low, dangerous rumble vibrated in his chest, a warning Alex had learned to never ignore. Yet tonight, his weariness and pride clouded his judgment. "Easy, Kane." "It's fine," Alex said, stepping forward. A sudden, sharp scrape split the darkness. From behind a row of vending machines, a figure lunged. A knife flashed, catching the sickly neon light. Alex barely had time to turn before the blade sliced through his jacket and bit deep into the flesh above his hip. A jolt of white-hot pain seared through his world. Instinct sent Kane forward in a blur of motion, jaws snapping. The attacker shouted in surprise and fear, kicking out wildly. The knife slashed again, this time catching Kane across his hind leg, slicing deep. Blood, dark and vivid, splattered across the wet pavement. Kane bit down hard, a grip of iron, forcing the man back with a snarl. But the attacker wrenched his arm free, dropped the knife, and vanished into the stormy night. Alex staggered, one hand pressed hard against his side, a terrifying warmth spreading between his fingers. The world shrank to the sharp smell of ozone, the drumming of the rain, and the sound of Kane's pained whimper. Through the blur, he caught a fleeting glimpse of a face, twisted and panicked. Then it was gone. His knees buckled. He tried to call for help on his phone, but the device slipped from his numb fingers. Kane limped toward him, leaving a trail of crimson behind. The dog nudged Alex's hand with his wet nose, a desperate, insistent pressure, refusing to let his partner slip into unconsciousness. Every movement was agony. Alex had always survived on routine, on self-reliance, on the quiet armored detachment he'd built after returning home. Tonight, it had all failed him. Alex looked down at Kane, and in those intelligent, pain-filled brown eyes, he saw a desperate, fierce resolve. Kane didn't whine. Instead, he pressed his strong body beneath Alex's shoulder, propping him up, his own teeth clenched against the fire in his leg. Together, inch by agonizing inch, they began to crawl toward the station's office door. The cold cut deeper with every movement, the sky tearing open above them, rain drenching their wounds. Alex's breath rattled in his chest, his vision tunneling. He wanted to curse, to scream, to simply give up and let the cold take him. But Kane kept going, dragging him forward with stubborn loyalty that had survived every hardship. What happened next in that cold, forgotten place would test the very limits of their bond. Would Kane's loyalty be enough to save them both, or would the storm and their wounds finally win? The world dissolved into a haze of cold and pain. Each ragged breath Alex took was a sharp reminder of the blade that had found its mark. The rain was a relentless, freezing curtain, soaking through his clothes and washing his blood into the cracks in the asphalt. He was fading, the edges of his vision blurring into a gray nothingness. But a persistent warm pressure against his cheek kept pulling him back. Kane, ignoring the deep gash in his own leg, kept nudging and licking Alex's face, his whines a desperate plea to stay conscious. "I'm here, boy," Alex slurred, his voice barely a whisper. "I'm still here." But the urge to close his eyes and surrender was overpowering. The cold was seeping into his bones, a deadly numbness that promised an end to the agony. Just as he felt himself slipping away, a sharp, insistent paw scraped at his jaw. The jolt of pain was grounding, a lifeline thrown into the churning sea of his delirium. For a bizarre second, it wasn't a dog's paw he felt, but the rough, callous hand of his drill sergeant from years ago, barking at him to get up, to never show weakness, to survive no matter the cost. That old, ingrained training sparked something deep within him. Survival wasn't about pride anymore. It was about the next minute, the next breath. "Okay," Alex croaked, the word tasting of blood and rain. "Okay, Kane, we move." Their progress was a torturous crawl. Kane, trembling from pain and effort, wedged himself as a living crutch under Alex's shoulder. With a grunt of sheer will, Alex pushed with his good leg, and they lurched forward a few inches. Kane's nails scraped against the rough concrete, his injured leg buckling but never quite collapsing. They were a single, broken entity, moving as one. As they crawled, Alex felt Kane lean heavily into his side, and the sensation triggered a memory. The day brought Kane home from the Veteran Support Center after opening the kennel gate. The dog had hesitated, then leaned ever so slightly into Alex's offered hand. That first touch of trust, of choosing connection over fear, was what kept them both moving now. Another few inches. 20 feet away, the office door glowed like a beacon. The rain intensified, stinging their faces, threatening to wash them away into the darkness. Alex's strength was failing. His arms shook violently, and he collapsed, his face scraping against the wet ground. The world spun in dizzying circles of neon and shadow. This is it, he thought. This is where it ends. On a dirty concrete slab in the middle of nowhere. But Kane would not accept it. He let out a sharp, frustrated bark and began tugging at the sleeve of Alex's jacket, his teeth clamping down on the thick fabric. He pulled with every ounce of strength left in his battered body, dragging the dead weight of the man he refused to lose. The pain from the movement was excruciating, a fire that cleaved through Alex's side, but it was also a gift. It was life, raw and ugly and honest. Driven by that canine determination, Alex forced another surge of effort. He dug his elbows into the ground, pushing while Kane pulled. Nails scraped, breaths came in ragged gasps, and the distance of the door slowly, miraculously shrunk. At Bonds Unspoken, we believe every story between a human and their animal companion deserves to be heard. If you agree, please like, share, and subscribe, and don't forget to turn on notifications so you can join us every time another bond speaks louder than words. Suddenly, a figure moved in periphery of his swimming vision. Someone was huddled under the station's narrow overhang, shrouded in a soaked blanket, face hidden. Kane immediately bristled, a low growl rumbling in his chest despite his exhaustion. He stopped pulling and positioned himself between Alex and the stranger, his body a shield, his eyes locked on the shadowy form. The stranger hesitated, looking at the bloody, crawling pair. For a terrifying second, Alex thought it was the attacker returning. But then the figure simply ducked their head and scurried away into the storm, another lost soul swallowed by the night. Paranoia, or just another broken piece of a broken world. There was no time to wonder. With the stranger gone, Kane returned to his task with renewed urgency. The final few feet were a blur of pure agony and stubborn will. Finally, his outstretched fingers brushed against the cold, painted metal of the office door. With the last of his strength, Alex reached up, grabbed a handle, and pulled. The door unlocked, swung inward. They collapsed together in a heap on the rough. Industrial linoleum inside, a tangled mess of man, dog, blood, and rainwater. The relative silence of the room was deafening after the roar of the storm. Alex lay on his back, staring at the water-stained ceiling tiles, his chest heaving. He tried to form words of thanks, but they died in his throat, lost behind clenched teeth. From the SUV's dashboard, now a world away outside, the scanner crackled again. A voice, faint and laced with static, broke through. Any sign of Alex Carter? He was supposed to check in from the Desert Star. His phone is going straight to voicemail. It was Sarah, his friend from the support center. Her voice was tight, with a fear that bled through the radio waves. Kane, lying panting beside him, let out a soft, guttural bark in the direction of the door. It was the only answer either of them could manage. Some nights, fate turns on the smallest decision. Some nights, survival comes down to nothing but the stubborn will to move forward, even if it means dragging yourself, bleeding and broken, across the cold floor of a forgotten gas station with only a wounded dog for company. They were inside, but the battle was far from over. The cold was still leeching the life from them, and the clock was ticking. How could they possibly signal for help when the world outside had no idea they were dying just feet away? The cold of the linoleum floor seeped into Alex's back, a deep chill that rivaled the fire in his side. He drifted in a shallow tide of pain, his awareness receding and returning in jagged flashes. The world was reduced to the sound of his own ragged breathing and Kane's labored pants. Every muscle in his body screamed for rest, for the sweet release of unconsciousness, but the wound in his side was a relentless needle, jabbing him awake each time he tried to surrender. Kane pressed his wet muzzle against Alex's cheek, his whole body trembling from shock and blood loss, but his gaze remained unwavering. The dog's chest heaved, his tongue lolling, yet he refused to let Alex's eyes stay closed for long. Then Kane's paw scraped his jaw, a jolt of pain that felt strangely familiar, like his drill sergeant hand shaking him awake years ago, barking at him to get up, to never show weakness. That old, ingrained discipline sparked something deep inside. Gotta get up, Alex croaked, but his body was a lead weight. Kane's only answer was a guttural whine and a determined shove of his head, forcing Alex to focus. The dog then turned his attention to their surroundings, his intelligent eyes scanning the dim room. He looked at Alex's backpack near the door, then back at the window, as if trying to connect two ideas. Limping badly, Kane dragged himself over to the grimy window and peered out into the rainy darkness toward the SUV. He let out a single sharp bark, then looked back at Alex, his eyes burning with fierce, almost human intensity. The SUV lights, Alex whispered, the idea forming slowly through fog. Sarah said to flash the lights. But the SUV was a world away. Alex's heart sank. There was no way he could make it back outside. Kane seemed to understand the problem. He hobbled back to Alex and began nudging his heavy-duty flashlight, which was still clipped to his belt. The message was clear: use this, with a groan that tore from his very core. Alex rolled onto his side, agony screaming from his wound. He fumbled for the flashlight, his blood-slicked fingers finally closing around its cold metal body. He pressed the switch. Nothing. He shook it, tapped it against the floor. Still nothing. Despair began to curdle in his gut. Kane whined, nudging the flashlight with his nose. Alex pressed the switch again, and this time the bulb flickered, a weak, dying orange glow that lasted only a second before sputtering out. It was useless. He let his head fall back against the floor, the last of his hope extinguished. The cold felt closer now, more welcoming. He was ready to let it take him. He closed his eyes, surrendering to the inevitable, but Kane would not. He let out a frustrated snarl and began to lick Alex's face furiously, the gesture raw and desperate. He then started to tug at Alex's jacket again, trying to pull him toward the door, back toward the impossible. "No, Kane, stop," Alex murmured, his voice thick with defeat. "It's over." The dog ignored him, his pulls becoming more insistent. The pain was grounding, pulling Alex back from the edge once more. He opened his eyes and saw the world not through the lens of a broken man, but through the eyes of the dog who refused to let him go. He saw the loyalty, not born of training or duty, but of a shared exile, a mutual understanding of what it meant to be cast aside. He looked at the flashlight in his hand, a final, stupid thought forming. He unscrewed the cap with trembling fingers and dumped the contents onto the floor. The batteries rolled out. He picked them up, wiped them on his less bloody shirt, and rearranged them, positive to negative, the way they were meant to be. He had put them in wrong in his pain fog state. He screwed the cap back on. He took a shallow breath, held it, and pressed the switch. A bright, solid beam of white light cut through the gloom, so powerful it made them both blink. It was the most beautiful thing Alex had ever seen. Kane's tail thumped weakly against the floor once, twice. A victory. Alex aimed the beam through the window, pointing it toward the general direction of the main road, and began to flash it on and off. SLS. 3 short, 3 long, 3 short. A universal cry for help. He didn't know if anyone was out there to see it. He didn't know if Sarah was close enough. All he knew was that Kane had given him one more chance, and he was taking it. The light was their voice, their prayer, their stubborn refusal to be erased by the night. Would it be enough to pierce the storm and reach a friendly eye? The beam of light was their lifeline. Each flash of the flashlight into the rainy darkness was a pulse of defiance, a stark, electronic heartbeat cutting through the storm. Alex's arm shook with the effort, the simple act of pressing the button sending fresh waves of pain from his side. 3 short, 3 long, 3 short. The SOS was a desperate prayer thrown at the indifferent night. Kane watched, his head cocked. Every fiber was being focused on the window and the man beside him. His own pain was pushed aside, a secondary concern to the monumental task of keeping Alex alive and signaling for help. Each time Alex's arm faltered, Kane would nudge his elbow with a wet nose, a silent command to continue. From the scanner outside, Sarah's voice became more frantic, clawing through the static. I saw a flash, near the Desert Star. Someone signaling. Alex, is that you? Flash again if you can hear me. Hope, sharp and painful, lands through Alex's haze. He redoubled his efforts, his thumb cramping on the switch. Kane, sensing the shift, let out a sharp, urgent bark that echoed in the small room, a vocal companion to the visual signal. But in the midst of their struggle, a shadow moved outside the window. A figure darted past, silhouetted against the distant glow of the highway. The truck driver, his face a pale, panic oval in the gloom. He glanced into the station, saw the bloodied man and the protective shepherd standing over him, and his eyes widened in terror. Without a moment of hesitation, he turned and fled back into the wet night, abandoning them completely. A cold fury, colder than the rain, washed over Alex. It wasn't just the pain or betrayal of the attack. It was the cowardice of a man who chose to run rather than help. The world was full of people who looked away. But not Kane. The dog had seen the figure too, letting out a low, warning growl that rumbled in his chest before turning his attention back to Alex. His message clear. Asterisk, ignore him. Focus on us. Asterisk. The moment of anger passed, leaving only a deeper exhaustion. The flashlight felt like a lead weight. His vision began to tunnel again, the darkness at the edges creeping inward. The rhythmic flashing became slower, more erratic. Kane immediately sensed a change. He whined, licking Alex's face, but the man was fading, his breath becoming shallower. The dog shifted his tactics. He stopped nudging for the light and instead pressed his entire body against Alex's side, sharing his warmth, his own shivering form a desperate attempt to stave off the hypothermia that was claiming his partner. He laid his head on Alex's chest, over his heart, as if listening to the weakening beat, willing it to continue. Inside the car skidding down the highway, Sarah White gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles white. Her headlights cut swaths through the rain, her eyes desperately scanning the roadside for the source of that fleeting flash. She was a friend from the support center, the one who had helped Alex adopt Kane. She knew his struggles, his quiet battles, and the profound bond he shared with the dog. The thought of them lying hurt and alone was a physical ache in her chest. Hold on, Alex, she whispered to the windshield, her voice a tight knot of fear. Just hold on. Don't you leave him, Kane. Don't you let him go. Back in the station, Alex drifted. The past and present bled together. He was in a dusty marketplace, the sun blisteringly hot, the weight of his pack immense. He was in a sterile hospital room, learning to walk again. He was signing the papers for Kane, the dog watching him with that same unwavering gaze. The memories were a chaotic film reel projected against the back of his eyelids. Through the fog, he felt a persistent, rough warmth on his hand. Kane was licking it, over and over, the sensation a tether to the real world. The dog's eyes, when Alex managed to focus, held a desperate love that finally broke through the last of Alex's stubborn self-reliance. He had always prided himself on being an island, on needing no one. But here at the end, all that mattered was this animal, this loyalty he had done nothing to deserve. "I trust you," Alex thought, the words clear and simple in his mind. He surrendered to it. He let Kane's will become his own. With a final, monumental effort, Alex pressed the flashlight button one last time and held it down, pointing the steady beam directly through the window. It was no longer a signal. It was a statement. "We are here." Kane, as if understanding this was a final act, raised his head and let out a long, piercing howl. It was a raw, primal sound that cut through the storm, a vow made of sound and spirit that rattled the window pane. And then, from the distance, a new sound answered, not the mournful wail of the wind, but the sharp, electrifying warble of a siren. It grew louder, closer, a beautiful, terrifying symphony of hope that filled the night. Blue and red strobes painted the rain-smeared windows, flashing through the room in a dizzying, beautiful rhythm. Tires crunched on gravel outside, car doors slammed, and voices, human voices, called out. The station door was flung open. Sarah stood there, silhouetted by the headlights of her car, her face a mask of terror and relief. Behind her, paramedics rushed forward with a stretcher. "Alex! Kane!" she cried out, her boots slipping on the wet floor as she surged toward them. She found them huddled together, a single, battered entity. Alex's hand was still curled around the flashlight, its beam now pointing uselessly at the ceiling. Kane, despite his own grave injuries, had positioned himself partly over Alex, a final, protective barrier. He looked at Sarah, his tail giving one feeble thump of recognition before his body sagged with total exhaustion. The paramedics moved in with gentle, efficient urgency. As they carefully lifted Alex onto the stretcher, Kane snarled once, a weak but fierce sound, unwilling to let strangers separate them. "It's okay, boy," Sarah whispered, kneeling beside him, her hands gently on his fur. "It's okay. We're here now. We've got you both." Only then did Kane allow his head to drop, his fight finally over. They were lifted onto stretchers, side by side, never more than a foot apart. The world became a blur of sirens, cold hands, and concerned voices, but the bond held fast. Neither had given up, not when it mattered most. The sterile, antiseptic air of the hospital was a shock after the rain-soaked night. Fluorescent lights hummed over Alex's pale, unconscious form, his breast shallow beneath a tangle of wires and bandages. The world had shrunk to this small room, the beeping of the heart monitor a fragile soundtrack to the threat of loss shadowing every heartbeat. On the other side of the swinging door, in the chilly hallway, Kane lay coiled on the linoleum, a silent, furry sentinel. His presence unnerved the hospital staff. Nurses whispered as they passed, giving the blood-stained, battered dog a wide berth. His body trembled from pain and exhaustion, but the fire in his eyes never wavered. Each time a stranger in scrubs stepped too close to Alex's door, a low, warning growl rumbled in his chest. His message was simple: stay back. Sarah hovered near the nurse's station, her hands shaking as she filled out forms. Her mind replayed the frantic rescue, the weak flashlight beam. The two of them collapsed together. The memory sent a shiver through her. She watched Kane through the glass partition, saw the tension in his frame, the deep gash on his leg still seeping. The older doctor, Evans, assessed Alex while a young nurse, Liam, approached Kane. Dr. Evans paused at the door, studying Kane's protective posture. "You'll need to keep him calm," he said gently to Sarah. "He won't let us do our job otherwise." Sarah nodded, but her own nerves were frayed. She remembered being a lost child in a crowded store, the sting of being overlooked, Watching Kane, she understood a profound truth. Sometimes loyalty was the purest form of survival. She knelt by the door, movement slow. "Kane, it's okay," she called, her voice soft. "They need to help Alex. Let them help." The dogs growled deep and protective and raw. He pressed his nose to the gap beneath the door, searching for a familiar scent, and he promised a safety. Liam approached with a bowl of water and a fresh bandage. Kane bared his teeth, eyes narrowed to slits. Liam froze, then backed away. "He won't let anyone through," he said, glancing at Sarah. "Not even me." Sarah's mind raced for a solution. Then a memory surfaced. The simple, off-key tune Alex hummed when his nightmares were bad. The same one he'd used to calm Kane during a thunderstorm. Words failed where melody could reach. She began to hum, her voice trembling but determined. Kane's ears flicked. The growling softened, then faded. He shifted closer, his head pressing against the door, his eyes losing their hard edge for the first time since they'd arrived. Inside the trauma room, Dr. Evans and Liam worked quickly. Blood was replaced, wounds were cleaned and stitched. The fight for Alex's life teetered on a knife's edge. But stubbornness, luck, and perhaps something more pulled him back. By dawn, the beeping steadied. His breaths deepened. Alex's eyes fluttered open, lost and unfocused, but alive. Liam peeked into the hall, relief on his face. He's stable. For now. Kane's tail thumped weakly against the wall. For the first time, he allowed Liam to approach, to gently clean and wrap his wounded leg. Sarah scratched behind Kane's ear. "Thank you," she whispered. When Alex managed to focus, he saw Sarah's tired smile and Kane's shape curled at the foot of his bed. He tried to move, winced, and settled for resting a shaky hand on the dog's back. "Didn't think he'd stick around. Old friend," he rasped. Kane licked his fingers, the gesture full of forgiveness. Dr. Evans returned, his expression grave as he read the chart. "The blade nicked a nerve. There's damage in your leg. A full recovery, it's unlikely. You won't be returning to any physically demanding duties." The words landed with the weight of a tombstone. Alex stared at the ceiling, his identity as a strong, capable man crumbling. Everything he'd built himself around was slipping away. Sarah reached for his hand. "You're alive. That's what matters." Alex nodded, not trusting his voice. Kane shifted closer, his head heavy on Alex's thigh, his heartbeat sinking with the man who had given him a second chance. Two survivors, scarred but undefeated. Some wounds only loyalty could heal. The world outside Alex's hospital window had brightened, but the hallway felt colder than ever. A bulletin board across from his bed was a mosaic of faded commendations and yellowed news clippings. Medals for acts of courage nobody remembered. Alex stared at the paperwork in his lap, numb from painkillers and the chilling reality that he couldn't feel his left foot. Kane lay beside the wheelchair, his hind leg encased in a stiff white cast, his chest rising in shallow breaths. His gaze was fixed on the door, expecting a threat to appear at any moment. Sarah brought a tray of bland food, tried to make conversation, but Alex answered in monosyllables. Frustration simmered beneath his skin. He hated the helplessness, the way the nurses gave Kane a wide berth, their wary glances a silent judgment. The door swung open without a knock. Chief Walsh entered, his uniform crisp, his tone sharper. He ignored Sarah, his focus drilling into Alex with cold calculation. "Carter, I've reviewed the incident report. You acted without backup, and in a potentially hostile situation based on a non-emergency call. And this," he jerked his chin toward Kane. "That dog was a documented risk, and you knew it." Alex's jaw tightened. "We're alive. That should count for something." Walsh didn't blink. "What it counts for is an internal review. You're on indefinite medical leave, effective immediately. And the dog..." His eyes flicked to Kane. "He'll be evaluated by the Animal Behavior Board. If he's deemed a risk, he's out. That's non-negotiable." Kane let out a low, uneasy whine. Sarah stepped forward, her voice trembling but firm. "If Kane hadn't been there, Alex would have died. You know that." "Emotion doesn't change policy, Ms. White," Walsh said, barely looking at her. Alex's hands balled into fists. "You're not taking him. He's not just a dog. Walsh leaned in, his words like ice. He's not your responsibility anymore. He turned and left, his boots echoing down the corridor like a final verdict. The silence he left behind was suffocating. Minutes later, the door creaked open again. A different man appeared, older, with a rumpled suit and a crooked press badge. "Alex Carter?" he said, not waiting for an answer. "Name's Wilson. City Tribune. Heard about what happened out on Route 8. Mind if I ask a few questions?" Alex hesitated. Wilson's gaze slid past him to Kane, and something flickered in his eyes. Recognition. "That dog, I've seen him before." Wilson knelt slowly, careful not to make sudden moves. Years ago, the Service Animal Program scandal. There was a cover-up, falsified records. Alex watched Kane's reaction. The dog was tense but curious, sniffing Wilson's extended hand. "What are you talking about?" Alex asked. Wilson dropped his voice. "A senator's nephew was knocked over by an aggressive dog. Was that you, boy?" He looked between Alex and Sarah. "That dog took the blame for something he didn't do. The program needed a scapegoat." Sarah moved closer. "What exactly are you saying happened?" "They doctored the reports," Wilson explained, glancing at the door as if expecting Walsh to return. "They shelved him to save someone's career. The real story never got out." Alex stroked Kane's neck, feeling the tension in the dog's muscles. "Those records were sealed. How do you know this?" "I've been digging into this for years," Wilson said. "The program needed a fall guy after some missing funds were discovered. They picked the dogs who were problems, the ones who saw too much or didn't follow orders blindly." Sarah looked from Wilson to Alex, her loyalty warring with fear. "So Kane was set up to cover up financial problems?" Wilson nodded. "And worse. You want my advice? Don't trust anyone from up top." His eyes were somber. "Dogs like him, they usually don't get a second chance." A nurse slipped in, avoiding looking at Kane. "Discharge is ready. You can leave when you're ready. Please use the side entrance." The message was clear. They were not welcome. Alex stared at his reflection in the dark window. The weight of being unwanted pressed down harder than any wound. The hospital, the system, even his own support network. None of them wanted a broken man or a dangerous dog. He struggled to his feet, wincing, and helped Sarah attach Kane's leash. They made their way past the awards and faded headlines. A procession of exiles. Staff stepped aside, avoiding their eyes. No one spoke a word of thanks. Only the click of Sarah's heels and the soft tap of Kane's cast broke the silence. The air in the parking lot was heavy with the promise of rain. Sarah squeezed Alex's shoulder. "I won't let them do this," she promised. "We fight together." Kane pressed his head to Alex's thigh, his tail giving a half-hearted wag, a question in his eyes. Alex knelt, his voice rough with emotion. "We're not done, not by a long shot. Sometimes saving a life was the greatest crime you could commit." The apartment smelled of dust and damp, a stark contrast to the sterile hospital. Alex moved to the cramped rooms, leaning heavily on his crutches, each step a fresh reminder of his shattered reality. Kane followed his every movement, his tail low, his gaze glued to his partner as if their bond was the only solid thing left in the world. The window faced a narrow alley where sirens wailed a nightly chorus. The city's heartbeat syncopated and frantic. On the chipped laminate counter, Sarah unpacked a brown paper bag, setting out groceries with forced cheerfulness. "I got the kind of soup you like," she said, her tone too light. "And the forecast says the rain should clear up by tomorrow." Alex barely grunted in response, his mind churning with fragments of the last few days, the cold hospital corridor, Walsh's accusations, Wilson's revelations about Kane, the suffocating silence from the support center. He felt invisible, erased by bureaucracy and rumor, more ghost than man. Kane prowled the room's perimeter, ears perpetually pricked. When a heavy thud sounded from the apartment above, he growled, low and guttural. Alex froze, his heart thudding, convinced for a paralyzing second that someone was listening on the other side of their own door. Paranoia, fed by pain and pills, tangled with his instincts. He reached down, pressing his palm to Kane's head for comfort. A soft rustle. Then a white envelope slid silently beneath the door. Sarah stooped to pick it up, her eyes narrowing at the blocky, anonymous handwriting. Alex unfolded the single sheet of paper, his hands trembling slightly. The message was short, chilling, and typed. Asterisk, stop digging. The next time you bleed, no one will find you. Asterisk. A cold rush swept through him, the kind of fear that leaves a metallic taste in the back of your throat. Kane whined, circling Alex, his instincts mirroring his partner's rising anxiety. The knock came a few minutes later, loud and authoritative. Kane barked, lunging at the door. Alex pulled him back, tension crackling in the small space. An old man's voice, raspy and tired, called out, "Keep that mutt quiet, or the landlord will have you both out." The neighbor, Mr. Dobbs, stood framed in the doorway, his face a roadmap of wrinkles and suspicion. Sarah tried to apologize, but Dobbs waved her off. His eyes fell on Kane, and for a split second, they softened. "Sorry," Alex muttered. "He's just on edge." Dobbs grunted. "Not every day you see a shepherd like that. Reminds me of one I knew during the factory riots decades back. Saved my hide." He looked at Kane as if seeing a ghost. "Your boy here ever bark at shadows or sleep with his back to the wall?" "Every night," Alex confirmed, his voice a whisper. Dobbs nodded, lowering his voice. "They moved a lot of dogs around after those riots. Some got new handlers, some just disappeared. My buddy's working dog vanished right after the precinct fire. Rumor was dogs that didn't follow orders perfectly got sent off or put down." He knelt slowly, letting Kane sniff his gnarled hand. "That scar? I'd swear he's the same one. Your boy here might be from a line of problem dogs that were actually loyal heroes." The story settled heavily on Alex. For years, he thought of Kane as an outcast, a problem dog burdened by a violent past. But Dobbs's words painted a different picture, a lineage of loyalty, a hidden history of service and betrayal that neither of them could fully escape. That night, the threat and the story circled in Alex's mind. He lay awake, tracing the lines of Kane's fur, thinking about the city's lost dogs, the files that might have vanished, the people who looked the other way. Sarah sat nearby, poring over old newspaper articles on her laptop, building a list of cases where service dogs had gone missing after incidents no one could properly explain. The next morning brought no peace. Kane barked at a shifting shadow in the hallway, his warning clear. Alex drew the curtains, feeling unseen eyes everywhere. Sarah tapped her pen against a growing stack of printouts, her resolve hardening. "We can't ignore this anymore, Alex. They want us scared. That's why they threatened you. But if even half of what Dobbs said is true, there are others out there who deserve answers." Alex looked from the threatening note to Kane. "We're not waiting for them to come back," he said, a flicker of his old purpose returning to his eyes. "We start with the records. Find out what happened to the dogs who disappeared. I owe Kane that much." He looked at the shepherd, who had settled at his feet, head high, gaze unwavering. "Maybe I owe it to all of them." The city archives were housed in the basement of the public library, a place that smelled of old paper and dust. Alex leaned heavily on his crutch as he pushed through the heavy doors, Kane staying close at his side, his nose twitching at the myriad of new scents. Sarah followed, her arms laden with a notebook and a file of their own sparse findings. The low hum of fluorescent lights mixed with the soft, dry sound of pages turning. Dust motes danced in the slivers of light from reading lamps, clinging to everything, even their fragile hope. Clara, the head librarian, sat behind a large oak desk, her hands folded, her gaze sharp beneath a crown of stark white hair. She looked up, her eyes recognizing Alex with a mix of curiosity and caution. She seemed nervous, glancing toward the door as she spoke. "Looking for something you lost, Mr. Carter?" Her tone was neutral, but her eyes were inviting a confidence. Alex nodded, keeping his voice low. "Service program records. Internal reviews, transfer logs, anything you have on dogs reassigned or retired after 2018. Clara's lips twitched in a faint, knowing smile. "Unusual requests are my specialty." She disappeared into the labyrinth of back rooms without another word. They settled at a long, scarred wooden table. Moments later, Wilson, the reporter, slipped in quietly, joining them with a nod, his ever-present notebook in hand. "Heard you're making waves," he murmured to Alex, glancing at Kane. Wouldn't be the first time they tried to bury the truth. Clara returned, her arms full of faded cardboard boxes and bound ledgers. She slid a particularly thick, unlabeled folder across the table. "Found this misfiled." It seemed someone didn't want it found easily. As she spoke, a janitor paused his mopping nearby, watching them a moment too long before moving on. Sarah, her fingers now stained with ancient dust, pulled a small box of archived digital discs from one of the boxes. One was marked with Kane's old service ID number. Her breath hitched. "This one has his number," she whispered. She slipped it into an old library laptop, the screen flickering to life. The video was grainy, black and white, shot from a dash cam. It showed a chaotic nighttime scene in an alley. Officers swarmed the location. A dog, a younger, fiercer Kane, strained at his leash, barking relentlessly. Suddenly, a masked figure grabbed a woman, pulling her into a car. The footage zoomed in shakily as Kane lunged, breaking free from his handler's grip. He tackled the attacker, his momentum knocking the mask loose. Sarah froze the frame. The man pinned beneath Kane wasn't a stranger. It was a wild-eyed younger version of Chief Walsh's son, caught in what looked like a botched abduction. The date on the video matched the beginning of the dog blacklist. She let the video play. The fallout was immediate and ugly. Angry voices shouted off camera. Then a voice, unmistakably Walsh's, barked an order. "Shut it down. Get that dog out of here. Now!" Alex stared at the screen, the pieces of the puzzle slamming together with brutal clarity. Kane hadn't failed. He had stopped a crime, but he had embarrassed the wrong person. "Walsh ruined these dogs to cover up his son's crime and the missing funds," Sarah said, her voice tight with anger as she summarized the damning connection. Wilson quietly took photos with his phone. "Looks like half the service dogs from that unit vanished that year. No press, no adoption records. Just silence." "The city was under pressure then," Wilson whispered, leaning in. "Misused funds, allegations of cruelty within the program. A few handlers quit abruptly. This was a cover-up. They used the dogs as scapegoats. Now they frantically searched the paperwork, looking for the documents that would confirm what the video showed. The paperwork inside was stamped confidential in bold red letters. It was a roster of dogs. Kane Max Daisy Bruno. Notes were scrawled in the margins in hurried handwriting. Asterisk behavioral risk. Removed from service. Transfer to holding. Asterisk the authorizing signature at the bottom of several pages was unmistakable. Chief Walsh. Clara watched him from her desk, her expression somber. "You keep digging. You'll find more than you want. People in power protect their own, even if it means destroying the innocent." Kane nuzzled Alex's hand, sensing the storm of anger and betrayal brewing in his partner. Sarah reached out, her fingers brushing the dog's fur, her voice tight. "We have to go public with this. If we don't, it gets buried forever." Alex shook his head, fear sharpening his words. "We can't trust anyone. Not until we know who else is involved." He looked at the damning video, then at Kane. This was bigger than his own ruined career. It was about justice for every dog who had been betrayed. Wilson nodded, his phone buzzing with an incoming message. He paled slightly as he read it. "Someone's leaking this. The threats. The files going missing. There's more at stake than just your status at the support center." Footsteps echoed in the quiet hallway outside the archive room. Clara glanced toward the sound, her voice dropping to a whisper. "I can keep these files hidden for a day, maybe two, but not forever. They watch this place. They watch everything." Sarah closed the laptop, her decision made. "We need to move. Now." Alex gathered the confidential files. Kane stood, instantly alert, his nose twitching as if he could already scent the danger closing in. Sometimes it isn't bullets or knives that kill the truth. It's fear, silence, and the dead weight of secrets about to be unearthed. A heavy moon, obscured by fast-moving clouds, cast distorted shadows across the deserted city park. Alex gripped Kane's leash, his nerves frayed as they moved quickly along the winding path. Every step sent a jolt of pain through his leg, a constant reminder of his vulnerability. Sarah kept close, her hands clenched around the straps of her backpack. The only copy of the damning video was inside, a digital ghost that could topple a powerful man. In the distance, flashes of blue and red pulsed between the trees. The air vibrated with the static of police radios and the harsh, clipped orders of officers forming a perimeter. Squad cars, their lights slicing through the gloom, had silently blocked the park's exits. Internal affairs had arrived in force, but the voice barking commands over a bullhorn was chillingly familiar. "Area secure. Move in." Chief Walsh's voice was icy and triumphant. Sarah's eyes widened in horror as they realized the trap had been sprung. "They've locked us in," she whispered, her voice trembling. "He knows about the files. He set this up." Wilson, who had been trailing them to document the meeting, darted behind a stone bench, raising his camera. But Alex saw the panic on the reporter's face. The story had just become dangerously real. The bullhorn crackled again. "Alex Carter, surrender immediately. You're under arrest for obstruction of justice and theft of department property." "Theft?" Sarah gasped. "They mean the video. They're not after us. They're after the evidence." Two officers in tactical gear moved in. Walsh strode to the front, his face a mask of cold satisfaction. "It's over, Carter. No more hiding behind your mutt." He gestured, and the team surged forward. Rough hands yanked Alex's arms behind his back. Cold metal handcuffs bit into his wrists. Sarah screamed, fighting as another officer ripped the backpack from her shoulders. The cry of protest that tore from her throat seemed to snap the last of Kane's restraint. The shepherd lunged, his powerful jaws snapping the leash with a sound like a gunshot. A rookie cop tried to grab his collar, but Kane twisted free, a whirlwind of fur and fury. He didn't bite, but used his body as a battering ram, knocking the officer off balance. "Subdue that animal," Walsh roared. Kane dodged a swinging baton, his movements a blur of instinct and desperation. His eyes never left Alex. He wasn't trying to hurt anyone. He was trying to reach his partner. Sarah broke free for a second, her voice hoarse. "Don't let them take him." The chaos escalated. Officers shouted. Wilson yelled for someone to record the scene. And somewhere, a warning shot fired into the air, the report deafening. Panic and fury warred in Alex's chest. He stumbled, pulled off balance by the officers. But Kane was there in an instant, pressing against him, almost pushing him backward, away from the crowd, toward the edge of the park where a line of sheds stood against the far fence. A memory weeks old flashed in Alex's mind. He'd been walking Kane here, and the dog had become obsessed with a loose board behind one shed, pawing at a crack in the foundation. Alex had dismissed it then. Now, with every cop in the city closing in, it was their only hope. "Follow him." Sarah yelled, ducking beneath a swinging arm. Kane leapt ahead, nosing the rotten board loose. Behind it was not a solid wall, but a narrow, dark opening into the ground, a forgotten drainage tunnel or utility access. He shoved Alex toward the darkness. "They've gone underground." Walsh's furious shout echoed, but the opening was too small for a grown man in gear to enter quickly. Alex dropped to his knees and scraped through the tight gap, the world reducing to the smell of damp earth and decay. Kane squeezed in right behind him, his hot breath on Alex's neck. Sarah tumbled in after, pulling the board mostly back into place. Above, the sound of pounding boots and angry voices faded, replaced by profound silence of the underground. The tunnel was pitch black, the air thick and stale. The only light came from the dying screen of Sarah's phone. Alex slumped against the damp earth wall, his chest heaving, his wrists aching in the cuffs. Kane immediately started licking his face, then nudged and worried at the metal restraints with his nose, a frustrated whine in his throat. Sarah clutched her now empty backpack. "They have everything. Our phones, my ID, but not this." She opened her jacket, revealing the hard drive tucked into an inside pocket. It was all they had left. Above, they could hear the barking of police dogs, but none could find the path that Kane, with his unique knowledge of this place, had discovered. Alex looked at the battered shepherd, awe and gratitude swelling in his chest. "You saved us again." Sarah hugged Kane, tears streaking the dirt on her face. He knew the way. He always does. Footsteps echoed in the tunnel's far end. The trio froze. Kane growled, standing guard, but the shadow that passed was only a scuttling rat. The tension ebbed, leaving behind a raw, hollow exhaustion. They had lost everything. Their reputations, their safety, any hope of returning to their old lives. But in that moment, pressed together in the dark, the only thing that mattered was survival and the unbreakable bond that had brought them this far. Sometimes the world turns on the hunted, branding the innocent as threats. When that happens, instinct is the only compass worth trusting. The air in the drainage tunnel was thick and cold, each breath a misty plume in the beam of Sarah's dying phone. They moved in a desperate, hobbling procession, Alex leading, one hand brushing the damp curved wall for balance, Kane a silent, limping shadow at his heels, and Sarah at the rear, clutching the hard drive like a holy relic. The only sounds were their ragged breathing, the scuff of their footsteps, and the distant, echoing drip of water. After what felt like an eternity, a sliver of gray light appeared ahead of grate, leading out to the city's industrial rail yard. They pushed it open, emerging into a world shrouded in a thick, freezing fog. Hulking train cars stood like sleeping giants, their outlines blurred and ghostly. They moved through the gloom until a weak lantern glow flickered ahead from within an abandoned switchman shack. Wilson waved them inside, his face tense in the low light. "We can't stay long. The entire precinct is on alert. This is the only place without cameras." Alex slid into a shadow corner, every muscle screaming. "Any word from Dobbs?" Wilson shook his head. "He said he'd meet us. He trusts you, not me." Before Alex could answer, the shack's corroded metal door screeched open. Chief Walsh's silhouette filled the doorway, backlit by the fog. He was alone, his hands raised in a mockery of peace. "You know how many nights I spent down here as a rookie?" Walsh's smile was all teeth, devoid of warmth. Nobody looks for trouble in fog. Sarah's jaw clenched. "What do you want, Walsh?" His gaze, cold and calculating, flicked to Sarah's jacket, where the hard drive was hidden. "The same thing you want. An ending." He took a step closer. "You're not the first to think you could expose me. The others, they left with nothing but scars." Alex pushed himself upright, pain shooting through his leg. Kane immediately positioned himself between Alex and the chief, a low, continuous growl rumbling in his chest, hackles raised. Walsh gave a dry, humorless laugh, still hiding behind a mutt. "That's your problem, Carter. You care too much." Wilson pulled out his phone, his finger hovering over the record button. "We have proof, Walsh. The video, the files. You can't bury it all." Walsh's massive control slipped, his eyes hardening into chips of ice. "I already did. Years ago. You think a few files will bring down what I built? You have nothing I can't explain away." A new voice, weathered and firm, cut through the tension from the shadows behind Walsh. "Not this time, Ray." Mr. Dobbs stepped into the lantern's glow, holding a faded, stained manila envelope. His hand shook slightly, but his eyes were clear and sharp. "You forgot who wrote the original incident report, didn't you? Before you doctored it." Walsh stiffened, his shoulders squaring. "You were always sentimental, Charlie. That's why they pushed you out." Dobbs's lips curled in a bitter smile. "That's why I kept the original. The night you torched the records room at the old kennel, you missed one." He held up the envelope, the full list of names, the signed order to dispose of every dog who failed your new, conveniently strict temperament test. Your signature, your instructions. You can't run from this. Walsh's hand twitched toward his coat. "Hand it over, old man. Walk away, and I'll make sure you're not blamed for any of this." Kane let out a sharp, piercing bark, the same distinctive warning sound he'd used during his service days when confronting a direct threat. It was a sound Alex hadn't heard in years, clear and commanding despite the dog's pain. Alex reached for the envelope, but Walsh was faster, a pistol now gleaming in his hand, aimed straight at Kane's head. "Last chance, Carter," Walsh hissed. "The files in the drive. Or I put down what I should have years ago." Sarah's breath caught. "Don't. He'll kill him anyway. Walsh sneered. He's a liability. Always was. Like you, Carter. You bring chaos. Alex felt a cold fury, clearer and sharper than any pain. No, you did this. You turned a program meant for good into a slaughterhouse to cover your son's crimes. You let loyal dogs pay the price. Dobbs edged closer, the envelope trembling, but held out like a shield. Don't give him anything. The truth is out. You can't stop it now. Walsh's voice dropped to a venomous whisper. Maybe not, but I can make sure you're not around to see it. He pressed the gun forward, the barrel now inches from Kane's skull. Your choice, the evidence or the dog. Wilson started to raise his phone again, but Walsh kicked it from his hand, the device skittering across the concrete floor into darkness. The gun never wavered. No more games. Alex's heart hammered against his ribs, his eyes darting between the unwavering loyalty in Kane's eyes and the envelope that held the truth for so many. He could see the dog was unflinching, ready. Every instinct screamed to fight, but one wrong move would be the last. Sarah whispered, Alex, don't. He'll shoot him anyway. Walsh's smile was a cracked, terrible thing. You never learn, Carter. Betrayal always comes from the ones closest to you. The fragile tension shattered. Dobbs lunged, swinging his cane at Walsh's arm. The gun fired, the report deafening in confined space. Kane darted like a striking snake, teeth snapping hard on Walsh's wrist. The chief shouted in pain and surprise, the pistol clattering to the floor. Walsh stumbled back, clutching his bleeding arm, pure rage contorting his features. You think this is over? I have people everywhere. It doesn't matter what you prove. You're nothing. Alex snatched the envelope from Dobbs and grabbed the hard drive from Sarah. You're wrong, he said, his voice steady for the first time. We decide what happens now. Not you. In that instant, a new family forged from a broken veteran, a discarded dog, an old man with conscience, and a steadfast friend stood united against a past that refused to die. Betrayal stings deepest when it wears a familiar face, but it's the fight that follows that defines who you become. The first blush of dawn scattered a weak, gray light over the industrial docks, painting the battered waterfront in shades of steel and shadow. Alex moved carefully, one hand pressed to his throbbing side, leading Kane and Sarah down the narrow planks between towering stacks of cargo containers. The air was thick with the smell of salt, rust, and dread. Somewhere out in the harbor, a tugboat let out a low, mournful wail, a sound that felt like a warning. Wilson trailed behind them, clutching the envelope and the hard drive, his face etched with a deep, nervous anxiety. They were there to meet his contact, someone from the state's attorney's office he promised they could trust. But in a city built on secrets, trust was a currency that had already failed them too many times. The wind carried the faint sound of voices. Sarah's breath hitched. Alex, she whispered, her voice tight. Someone's here. From behind a stack of weathered crates, Chief Walsh stepped into view, a gun held steady in his hand. He wasn't alone. Beside him was a lean, familiar figure. Officer Jackson, the young, eager-faced man who had always been a little too quick to agree with Walsh at the support center meetings. A cold knot tightened in Alex's gut. The betrayal was complete. Walsh leveled the weapon at Sarah. You think you can run forever, Carter? This is where your story ends. His voice was chillingly calm. Drop the bag. Sarah hesitated, her arms tightening around the backpack. Walsh fired a single shot into the air. The crack of the gunshot echoed across the water, startling a flock of gulls into a panicked flight. Kane barked, a raw, furious sound. Every instinct screamed at him to defend, but his limp was pronounced now, fresh blood staining the fur around his cast. Still he moved, placing his body between Sarah and the threat, a low, continuous growl rumbling from his chest. He would not stand down. Jackson moved to grab Sarah. Don't make this harder than it has to be, he hissed, his voice stripped of its former friendliness. Wilson fumbled for his phone, but a single, venomous glare from Walsh silenced him. Alex stared Walsh down, his voice rough. Let her go. This is between you and me. No, Walsh sneered. It's about cleaning up a mess. Making sure no one ever hears a pathetic whimper of your so-called truth. He nodded at Jackson. The rookie officer roughly twisted Sarah's arm, yanking her toward him. Alex's hands shook with a mixture of fury and terror. You're still making the same mistake, Walsh. Using people. Destroying what you can't control. Kane's growl rose in pitch. His whole body vibrated with pain and defiance. He lunged, not at Walsh, but at Jackson. His jaws clamped down on the officer's wrist, not to maim, but to disarm and distract. Jackson cried out in shock and pain, his grip on Sarah breaking. She stumbled free. Walsh turned, the gun swinging from Sarah to the struggling dog, and fired. The bullet did not find its intended target. Kane yelped, a short, sharp cry of pain, and staggered. A dark, wet patch bloomed instantly on his side, the blood pouring freely. He collapsed onto the damp dock boards. Sarah screamed. Wilson shouted for help, but his voice was swallowed by the vast, empty space of the docks. Alex froze, horror rooting him to the spot as Walsh advanced, the gun now swinging between him and Sarah. I warned you, Carter. You cost me everything. Now I'm taking it all back. With a strength that defied his shattered body, Kane dragged himself to his feet. He snarled, a force of pure will, and lunged again, this time tackling Jackson fully. The two went down in a tangle of limbs and snarls. Kane's teeth found purchase on Jackson's arm, and the officer's scream was one of genuine panic. His service weapon clattered from his holster, skittered across the slick wood, and dropped into the dark water with a soft plunk. Walsh, cursing violently, turned the gun on the dog, but Sarah threw herself into his path, shoving him off balance. Walsh recovered, shoving her aside hard. She fell against a container with a grunt of pain. He raised the gun again, aimed at the struggling dog, and fired a second time. The world went silent. Kane collapsed. Jackson, bleeding and whimpering, scrambled out from under him. Walsh stood breathing ragged, his gun now trembling in his hand. The silence broke as Alex scrambled to Kane's side, his own pain forgotten. He gathered the dog's limp, bleeding body into his arms. Stay with me, boy, he choked, the words a raw plea. For the first time, he let the tears fall, his face crumbling openly. Stay with me? Walsh took a step forward, but Wilson moved to block him, shouting now for backup, for witnesses, for anyone to stop the madness. The commotion finally drew attention. A few dock workers on the early shift emerged from a nearby shack, their faces alarmed. Walsh hesitated, his authority crumbling in the face of actual witnesses. Jackson rolled away, clutching his bleeding arm, utterly defeated. Sarah crawled to Alex's side, her sobs mingling with his. He saved me, she wept. He saved all of us. Alex buried his face in Kane's fur, feeling the dog's heartbeat slow to a terrifying, weak rhythm. You did everything right, he whispered, his voice breaking. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Sometimes a city only changes because someone gives more than it ever deserved. The distant sound of police sirens began to rise, but they were too late. Walsh, seeing his legacy evaporate, turned and fled into a maze of containers, his threats fading into the morning mist. Wilson pressed a hand to Alex's shoulder. You have to let them see this, he said softly, gesturing to the workers now watching in horror. Don't let his sacrifice be forgotten like the others. Alex nodded, tears streaming down his face. He felt the weight of the dog in his arms, the weight of all the stories that had almost been buried. We'll tell them, he vowed, his voice a broken whisper. We'll tell everyone. The morning sun finally broke free of the clouds, painting the harbor in a light that felt too bright, too cruel. Alex knelt in his grief, holding all that mattered, learning at last what it meant to love something enough to shatter. A sterile, artificial light seeped into the waiting room of the animal hospital, bleaching the color from everything it touched. Alex sat hunched on a hard plastic chair, his hands clasped tightly together. They were clean now, but in his mind, they were still stained with Kane's blood. The low, constant hum of the ventilation system was the only sound, punctuated by the occasional distant bark or the soft shuffle of a technician's footsteps. The world felt suspended, holding its breath for a verdict that would define everything. Sarah paced the narrow hallway, her knuckles white as she gripped a paper coffee cup. Her eyes were red-rimmed and swollen, but she had no tears left. She stopped beside Alex. "The vet said the next 24 hours are critical," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "He lost so much blood, but he's strong, Alex. If anyone can pull through, it's him." Alex nodded, a stiff, mechanical motion. He was trapped in a loop of horrific images. Kane leaping, the gunshot, the way his dog had collapsed. He tried to form a prayer, but the words wouldn't come. There was only a hollow, aching silence where his hope used to be. Mr. Dobbs shuffled into the room, a thermos in his gnarled hand. He sat heavily in the chair next to Alex. "You ever notice," the old man said quietly, "how the world never stops for grief? Out there, people are arguing over parking spots, completely missing the sunrise." He nudged the thermos toward Alex. "Drink. You need it." Alex accepted it, his hands trembling. "He saved us all," Alex murmured, the words sounding inadequate. "They'll never know what he gave." Dobbs studied the closed door of the surgical recovery room. "They never do, son. That's the curse of a good soul. They bleed in silence." Sarah sat on the floor, her back against the wall, drawing her knees to her chest. "I just kept thinking I could fix it," she whispered, more to herself than to them. "That if I was smart enough or brave enough, I could undo what that man broke." Alex looked at her, his voice rough with a fatigue that went beyond the physical. "No one can fix everything, Sarah. We just carry each other as far as we can." In the agonizing wait, time lost all meaning. Minutes felt like hours. Every footstep in the hall made Alex's heart lurch. Hope would flare with the sound of an approaching vet, only to fade again as they passed by. Finally, the door to the recovery room opened. Dr. Evans emerged, her scrub stained, her face etched with exhaustion, but her eyes were clear. "He's still fighting," she said, her voice gentle but direct. "The bullet misses major organs, but it caused significant tissue damage, and he lost a tremendous amount of blood. The next 12 hours are crucial. If he makes it through, he has a chance." A shaky, tremulous breath escaped Alex. It was the first full breath he'd taken since the docks. "Can I see him?" Dr. Evans nodded. Briefly, "He's sedated, but he knows you're here. Be calm for him." Alex slipped into the dim, quiet room. The sharp scent of antiseptic wore with a familiar, comforting smell of Kane's fur. The shepherd lay on a padded table, and Ford taped his foreleg, an oxygen tube by his nose. His side was a mass of bandages. His eyes were closed, his breathing shallow but even. Alex moved to the table and slowly, carefully, laid a trembling hand on the thick fur behind Kane's ears. "You stubborn old hero," he choked out, his voice thick with emotion. "You're still here." Kane's eyes fluttered open. They were hazy from drugs and pain, but they focused on Alex. His tail, lying limp on the table, gave the faintest, weakest thump. Just once. It was enough. In that moment, the noise of the outside world, the beeping monitors, the humming lights, the weight of their broken past, all of it faded away. There was only this. The shared breath of a man and a dog who had refused to leave each other, and the unspoken promise that they never would. The pain of nearly losing Kane cut deeper than any physical wound. It forced Alex to finally look at his own reflection in the dog's quiet struggle. Were the same, he thought, his hand resting on Kane's still form. Asterisk both broken, both cast aside, both fighting to find a place to belong. Asterisk. He saw his own isolation, his own fears of being deemed worthless, mirrored perfectly in the dog everyone had labeled a problem. They had both been saved by the same stubborn, unwavering loyalty. Sarah hovered in the doorway, tears brimming in her eyes once more. "You too," she whispered. "You were always more alike than you knew." Alex stroked Kane's paw, his voice barely a whisper. "He was thrown out because they called him dangerous. I was thrown out because I couldn't look away. Maybe the world just doesn't know what to do with the ones who won't give up." Dobbs put a gnarled hand on Alex's shoulder. "That's what makes you both rare. Most folks fight for themselves. You two, you fight for something bigger." As the sun climbed higher, washing the room in a soft, morning glow, Alex looked at Kane and understood. Loyalty wasn't just about staying by someone's side in the light. It was about being willing to crawl through the darkness with them, again and again, for a dawn nobody else believed was coming. The city's morning was bright and restless, but inside the low, brick building on its east edge, time seemed to move with a different, gentler rhythm. Alex signed his name in the visitor's log at the Hope Haven Animal Shelter, the act feeling strangely formal without a title like officer in front of it. The shelter director, a warm, capable woman named Miss Davis, led him down a corridor lined with chain-link kennels. The sound of barking filled the air, a chaotic symphony of hope, loneliness, and raw need. Kane limped steadily beside him, bandages peeking from beneath his fur. Every few steps, Alex would rest a hand on the dog's back, a silent reassurance for them both. Sarah met them at the intake office, her arms full of donated chew toys and blankets. "You look better," she said, her smile genuine. "Both of you." Alex managed a tired nod. "First time in weeks, I woke up and didn't feel like the world was collapsing." They were volunteers now, part of their court-mandated community service. But it felt like more than that. It felt like healing. Alex took the early shift, mucking out kennels and filling water bowls, slowly learning the quiet rhythms of the shelter. He learned which dogs barked loudest at sunrise, the hush that fell during afternoon naps, and the desperate, hopeful look in every pair of eyes that tracked him down the hall. A group of elementary school children arrived for a visit, their voices a chorus of excitement and nervous giggles. A small girl with pigtails clung to her teacher's leg and whispered, "Are these all bad dogs?" Alex knelt, wincing only slightly, and shook his head. "No such thing. Just dogs waiting for a second chance, like all of us." Kane lay quietly in a patch of sunlight by the wall. The children, emboldened by his calm, crept closer until they were brave enough to stroke his ears. He didn't flinch, only watched them with the patient gaze of someone who knew all about waiting. Alex noticed how the children softened around the dog, their laughter replacing fear, small hands opening in trust. Sarah led a story hour, reading from a book about a lost puppy finding its way home. Alex found himself lingering by the window, watching the shadows shift in the play yard. He remembered every dog that had crossed his path, the ones he'd helped, the ones he'd failed, the ones lost to a cold system. For years, he believed his purpose was to enforce and protect. Now he saw a different, quieter courage, the courage to simply stay, to stay for those who had no one else. Between chores, Alex learned each shelter dog's name and story. There was Biscuit, an old terrier mixed with a ragged ear, abandoned when his owner moved into a nursing home. Pepper, a three-legged spaniel whose family left her behind when they relocated. Zeus, a massive Rottweiler labeled aggressive who melted into a puddle of joy at the sound of a gentle voice. Alex saw echoes of Cain in each of them, scars, fears, and a longing not just for survival, but for someone to see their worth. In the quiet afternoon lull, Alex sat on a bench beside Cain's bed in the staff room, his hand resting on the dog's paw. "You know what it's like, don't you?" he murmured. "To wait for someone to believe you're worth another chance." Cain pressed his nose into Alex's palm, his eyes closing in trust. Later, Miss Davis approached him with a clipboard. "We need more people like you, Alex. You understand. What they need most isn't just food or walks. It's not to be forgotten." Alex studied the adoption board, photos of dogs with dates scribbled underneath, some crossed out, some still waiting. He thought of the life he'd left behind, the identity that had been stripped away. It was being replaced, piece by piece, by the slow, steady act of showing up for creatures who would give nothing back but their trust. During a lunch break, Sarah found him sitting by the back fence, tossing a ball for Cain, who made a show of chasing it despite his limp. She watched for a moment, then sat beside him. "You ever wonder if any of us really get a fresh start?" she asked. Alex smiled, tired but genuine. "I think maybe the point is we keep showing up. No matter how many times life knocks us down, we come back, even if it's just for one more throw, one more day." She nudged him playfully. "You're not the same man I met at that gas station." He shook his head, watching Cain roll in a patch of clover. "No, I'd never have let myself belong anywhere again. I thought being strong meant being alone." Sarah leaned against his shoulder. "You're allowed to forgive yourself, you know. The world's already moved on. Maybe you should, too. Alex watched a young pit bull named Daisy press against her kennel bars, her tail wagging furiously for any scrap of attention. I always thought it was my job to fix everything, he said softly. But maybe it's enough just to be here. To stay. The afternoon sun fell in golden bars across the yard. The children waved goodbye, their laughter lingering. Miss Davis tacked an adopted sign to the board, and for the first time in a long while, Alex felt hope not as a desperate gamble, but as something small, steady, and earned. The city was still broken, full of unfinished stories. But here, in this patchwork place of wagging tails and second chances, Alex began to understand that healing didn't mean erasing scars. It meant making room for them and building a new purpose around them. The city's main square shimmered under a bright noon sun, buzzing with an energy that felt both celebratory and profound. Banners fluttered in the warm breeze. Bright tents dotted the plaza, and crowds gathered in a festive yet respectful atmosphere. The air was filled with the sounds of children laughing, the smell of fresh popcorn, and the distant notes of a brass band. This was Heroes' Day, a celebration for all who had survived and healed, both two-legged and four-legged. Alex stood at the edge of the festivities, a knot of nervous tension in his chest. He fingered the crisp invitation in his pocket, still wrestling with the feeling that he didn't belong on a stage. Yet, here he was. Kane stood calmly at his side, his coat brushed to a shine, his eyes clear and alert. The shepherd's limp was barely noticeable now, just a slight stiffness in his gait. Children clustered around, their small hands reaching out to gently stroke his head and neck, offering treats and handmade paper medals. Sarah moved through the crowd, her laughter light and real as she gathered stories from other attendees. She caught Alex's eye and gave him an encouraging nod. The master of ceremonies, a warm-faced local news anchor, took the stage and announced the start of the parade. A line of rescue dogs, sporting brightly decorated bandanas, stood ready. There were dogs who had sniffed out survivors in rubble, others who provided comfort in hospitals, and some, like Kane, whose heroism was written in less visible, but no less vital, scars. But when the anchor called Kane's name as a grand marshal, a hush fell over the square. Then applause erupted, not roaring, but deep and heartfelt, as Kane took his first steady steps forward, head held high, his scars visible for all to see. They were not marks of shame, but badges of honor. Alex walked beside him, his heart pounding. For years, he had felt invisible, his loyalty and sacrifices dismissed by the very system he'd once been part of. Now, the city's gratitude washed over him, not for the uniform he once wore, but for the man he was and the bond he shared with the dog beside him. Kane paused, allowing a young boy in a wheelchair to lean forward and carefully fasten a blue silk ribbon around his neck. The smooth fabric felt cool against Alex's fingers as he helped secure it. The dog's eyes, full of quiet wisdom, then turned and locked with Alex's. No words were needed. The gratitude and mutual understanding flowed between them in that single glance. The parade wound its way through the square, people cheering and waving signs that read, "Thank you, Kane," and "Second chances save lives." Alex felt his throat tighten, emotion pressing against the walls he'd spent a lifetime building. Sarah walked on his other side, her hand a gentle, steadying presence on his back. "This is what healing looks like," she whispered. At the end of the route, the mayor took the stage and invited Alex and Kane to join him. The crowd quieted once more. "Today," the mayor began, his voice carrying across the square, "we honor not just bravery, but the courage to forgive, to heal, and to belong. Alex, Kane, your story reminds us that the strongest bonds are forged not in easy times, but in the relentless will stand back up after we fall." Alex looked out at the sea of faces, his mind momentarily blank. The weight of the moment threatened to overwhelm him. But then, as Kane nudged his hand with a cool, wet nose, he found his voice. It was trembling, but it was honest. "Thank you," he started, clearing his throat. "This dog, he saved me. All he ever wanted was to belong." He looked down at Kane, his hand resting on the dog's head. "We all need someone who refuses to leave. That's what he taught me." The applause that followed was louder this time, a wave of acceptance that echoed through the square and seeped into the city's old wounds. Kane let out a single soft woof, his tail held high, as if adding his own agreement to the sentiment. After the ceremony, Alex lingered as people approached. Children asked for photos with Kane. Parents shook his hand. Strangers thanked him for not giving up on his friend. For the first time, the word belonging settled deep within him, not as a temporary state, but as a future he was finally willing to claim. Sarah squeezed his arm, her eyes shining. Maybe now it's time to share your story with more than just the people who were there. Alex looked at the city, alive and welcoming under the sun, and then down at Kane, who leaned contentedly against his leg. He nodded, a sense of peace settling over him. Maybe it's time. The world outside had settled into a quiet hum, the distant echoes of parade music and laughter now just a memory. But inside Alex's apartment, a profound peace had taken root. A small fire crackled in the hearth, painting the walls with shifting, golden light. Kane lay curled on his favorite blanket before the stove, one paw twitching in a dream, his breathing deep and steady, a sound Alex had come to rely on more than any other. Sarah sat in the armchair by the window, a book open on her knees but forgotten. Her gaze would occasionally drift to Alex, a soft, contented smile touching her lips. This new, fragile peace was something none of them wanted to break. Alex sat at the small wooden table, a notebook open before him. The pen in his hand felt heavier than any weapon he'd ever carried. He stared at the blank page, searching for the right words. Finally, he began to write, the scratch of ink loud in the comfortable silence. Tonight, he read aloud, his voice quiet but clear. Asterisk, I am sitting with Kane, my friend, my shadow, my stubborn, brave heart. This city has changed. Maybe we have, too. Maybe we had to. Asterisk. Kane stirred at the sound of his voice, eyes blinking open. The shepherd's tail thumped softly twice against the blanket, a reminder that loyalty was sometimes the only answer you could count on. Sarah closed her book and joined him at the table. What are you writing? She asked softly. Alex hesitated, then slid the notebook toward her. Something for the local paper. Or maybe just for us. She read, her voice gentle. Asterisk. A city that used to look away in fear now gathers in the open light. It celebrates the broken and the brave. And all of it, every single second chance, started with a dog who wouldn't let go. Asterisk. She looked up, her eyes shining with pride. Alex watched her face, searching for doubt, but found only unwavering support. He looked at Kane. Thank you, he said, his voice rough with emotion. You never left. Not once. Kane stretched with a soft groan, then shifted closer, resting his head heavily on Alex's foot. The weight was familiar, grounding. Alex kept writing, the words flowing more freely now. He wrote of silent patrols and midnight walks, of losses that nearly broke him, of moments when only the warm, solid press of Kane's body kept the darkness at bay. He wrote about the children at the shelter, the old men with haunted eyes, the quiet understanding he'd found with Sarah. When he paused, Sarah placed her hand over his. You know, she whispered, most people spend their lives running from something. But you and Kane, you stayed. You fought. Alex looked into the fire, the ache in his chest less sharp, less defining. I always thought staying meant you were too scared to move on, he admitted. But now I think it might mean you care enough not to let go. Kane huffed in his sleep, chasing one last dream. The room was filled with a peace Alex hadn't known in years. Sarah nudged him. You're different than when we met. Softer. Stronger, too. A faint, genuine smile touched Alex's lips. I think I finally believe I belong somewhere. That's new for me. He gazed at the scarred shepherd dozing by the fire and let himself remember every moment that had brought them here. For the first time, those memories didn't hurt. They were proof. Proof of love, of survival, of a promise kept. Alex closed a notebook, his hand lingering on the cover. He leaned back, letting the fire's warmth soak into his bones. The familiar, comforting weight of Kane's presence grounded him completely. He looked at Sarah, then at Kane, then at the quiet darkness beyond the window. The fear that used to stalk him was still out there, but tonight it felt smaller, outnumbered by the hope glowing within these four walls. Sarah squeezed his hand, her voice soft but clear in the quiet room. Sometimes the bravest thing is just refusing to leave. Alex felt something deep within him finally loosen, a tangled knot of grief, shame, and old anger slowly dissolving. He let it go, just for tonight. He let himself rest. The fire burned low, casting long, gentle shadows. Kane snored softly. Sarah's hand remained on his. And for the first time in a lifetime of storms, Alex Carter finally felt safe, anchored right where he was always meant to be. The city was quiet beyond the window, but in this small room, healing was loud, sure, and finally complete. He knew he would hold on to this feeling. He would keep telling their story, his and Kane's, for anyone who still believed hope was out of reach, because their story was proof that it never is. If stories like this touch your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Bonds Unspoken. Every click helps us share more incredible moments that celebrate the bond between humans and animals. And be sure to turn on the notification bell so you never miss a story that reminds us what true loyalty feels like.